The axe hit the dirt first, then the sword, then the bow, and finally the leather baldric studded with throwing knives, each weapon falling with a dull thud onto the packed earth beside the weathered fence post. Grishka stood at the farm gate with empty hands and emptier eyes, her green skin pale with exhaustion, her small tusks chipped from years of violence she could no longer stomach. The human man who had just emerged from the barn froze mid-step, a bucket of feed swinging from one calloused hand, his weathered face registering first alarm, then confusion, then something else entirely, as she spoke the words that would change both their lives. "I am done fighting," she said, her voice hoarse and low. "Let me work." Owen Yarrow had lived alone on his farm for 3 years, ever since his father had passed and left him the 100 acres of rocky soil and stubborn livestock that defined the northern edge of Millbrook County. He was 30 years old, broad-shouldered from hard labor, with brown hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He had expected many things when he woke that morning, the first true day of spring planting season rain perhaps, or a lame horse, or news that the grain prices had dropped again. He had not expected an orc woman to lay down an arsenal at his gate and ask for work. "You want to work," he repeated slowly, his grip tightening on the bucket handle. "Here, here," she confirmed. Her accent was thick, the consonants harder than a human would make them, but her meaning was clear. "I can plow, I can lift, I can mend fences, I can do whatever you need." She swayed slightly, catching herself against the fence post. Now that Owen looked closer, he could see the gauntness in her face, the way her leather armor hung loose on her frame. When had she last eaten? The sensible thing would be to refuse. Orcs were trouble, everyone knew that. They came from the Iron Peak Mountains, raiding and pillaging, burning crops and stealing livestock. The fact that the war had ended 2 years ago with a tentative treaty did not erase 30 years of bloodshed. His own father had lost a brother to an orc raid. The people of Millbrook would not look kindly on Owen harboring one of them, even one who claimed to be done fighting. But Owen had never been entirely sensible, and there was something in the way she stood there, stripped of weapons and dignity both, that struck a chord somewhere deep in his chest. He had seen that look before in the mirror, after his father died, and the weight of the farm had settled onto his shoulders like a yoke. It was the look of someone who had nothing left to lose and was asking for one final chance anyway. "You are injured," he said, nodding toward the dark stain on her side where her armor had been torn. She glanced down as if only now remembering it. "It will heal. Not if it gets infected." He set down the bucket. "Come inside. Let me see it." Suspicion flickered across her broad features. "Why?" "Because infected wounds kill people, and I do not need a corpse on my property." The words came out harsher than he meant them, but she seemed to accept the pragmatic reasoning. She bent slowly, gathering her weapons with obvious pain, and Owen realized she had been planning to leave them there. "Bring those," he said. "I do not want thieves thinking I have an armory lying about." The walk from the gate to the farmhouse was perhaps 50 yards, but Grishka made it seem like 50 miles. Owen kept his pace deliberately slow, pretending to examine the fence line while she limped behind him. His farmhouse was small but solid, built of stone and timber by his grandfather, with a thatched roof his father had replaced just before he died. Owen pushed open the door and gestured inside. Grishka hesitated at the threshold, her nostrils flaring. Could she smell something he could not? But then she ducked through the doorway, her head nearly brushing the frame despite her bent posture, and stepped into the dim interior. Owen's home was sparse but clean. A stone hearth dominated one wall, with a simple table and 2 chairs in the center of the room. A narrow staircase led to a loft where he slept. Shelves held jars of preserves and sacks of grain, and bundles of herbs hung drying from the rafters. It smelled of wood smoke and bread, and the faint sweetness of last autumn's apples. "Sit," Owen said, pulling out one of the chairs. Grishka lowered herself onto it with a barely suppressed groan, setting her weapons on the floor beside her. Owen moved to the hearth, stoking the banked coals to life and setting a pot of water to heat. "How long since you ate?" "3 days," she said after a pause. "Maybe 4 days." Owen bit back a curse and pulled down a loaf of bread from the shelf, slicing off a thick portion and slathering it with butter. He set it in front of her along with a jar of strawberry preserves and a cup of cool water from the pitcher. "Eat slowly," he warned. "You will make yourself sick otherwise." She stared at the food as if it might bite her, then picked up the bread with trembling hands and took a small, careful bite. Owen watched her eyes close, watched the tension in her shoulders ease just a fraction. When had he last seen someone that hungry? He turned away to give her privacy, busying himself with gathering clean cloth and a bottle of grain alcohol for disinfecting wounds. By the time he turned back, the bread was gone and Grishka was gripping the empty cup, her knuckles white. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You are welcome." He set his supplies on the table. "Now let me see that wound." She unbuckled her armor with practiced efficiency, despite the way her hands shook. Beneath it, she wore a rough linen shirt, already stained with blood and dirt. She lifted it to reveal a gash along her ribs, angry and red, though fortunately not as deep as Owen had feared. "What did this?" "A sword," she said flatly. "3 days ago, before I decided I was done." Owen soaked a cloth in the warm water and began cleaning the wound. Grishka did not flinch, though he knew it had to hurt. Her skin was warmer than a human's, almost feverish, and the musculature beneath was impressive even in her weakened state. He had never been this close to an orc before. He had seen them across battlefields during his brief stint in the territorial militia 5 years ago, but never like this. Never close enough to see the fine grain of her skin or the way her pointed ears twitched at every sound. "You were a soldier," she said. It was not a question. "How did you know?" "The way you move, the scars on your hands." She nodded toward his right hand where a puckered line ran from his thumb to his wrist. "Sword training." 5 years ago, Owen admitted. "I served my 2 years and came home when my father got sick." He poured alcohol over the wound, and this time she did flinch, her breath hissing between her teeth. "Sorry, I have had worse." "I do not doubt it." He bound the wound with clean linen, wrapping it snugly around her ribs. "You said you decided you were done. Done with what?" "Fighting for your clan." Grishka was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was distant, as if the words came from somewhere far away. "I was a raider. For 12 years, since I was 14, we crossed the mountains, burned farms, took supplies, killed anyone who got in our way." She looked up at him, and Owen saw something bleak in her dark eyes. "I was good at it. Very good." Owen kept his expression neutral as he tied off the bandage, though his heart had gone cold. This woman had done the very things he had sworn to protect against. She might have killed people he knew. But when he looked at her now, all he saw was exhaustion and regret. "What changed?" he asked. "I killed a boy," she said simply. 16, maybe 17. He came at me with a pitchfork, trying to protect his family's grain stores. I cut him down without thinking, the way I had been trained. And then I saw his mother's face. She closed her eyes. "I have killed many people. Warriors, soldiers, guards, but this boy with his pitchfork, that was different. That night I kept seeing his face and his mother's face, and I realized I could not do it anymore. So you left your clan." "So they cast me out," she corrected. "When I said I would not raid anymore, they gave me 1 day to leave Iron Peak territory. My own sister held a blade to my throat and said if she ever saw me again, she would kill me herself. Grishka opened her eyes, and they were bright with unshed tears. I have been walking for 2 weeks. I am done fighting. I do not know how to do anything else, but I want to learn. I need to learn. Owen sat back, studying her. Every instinct of self-preservation told him to send her away, to avoid the trouble she would bring. But another part of him, the part that had stayed behind when other young men went seeking glory in the war, the part that found more value in nurturing life than taking it, recognized a kindred spirit in desperation. I need help with spring planting, he said slowly. The work is hard and the hours are long. I cannot pay much, but I can offer room in the barn, 3 meals a day, and a chance to prove yourself. If you work hard and cause no trouble, you can stay through the harvest. After that, we will see. Grishka stared at him as if he had just offered her the moon. You would trust me, after what I told you. I trust that you are telling the truth about being done fighting, Owen said. And I trust that you are desperate enough to mean it. Beyond that, we will have to see. He stood, gathering his supplies. Rest today. Tomorrow morning the real work begins. That night, Owen lay awake in his loft, listening to the sounds of Grishka settling into the barn. He had given her blankets, and another meal of bread and cheese and cold chicken, and she had accepted them with a dignity that sat oddly with her circumstances. He wondered if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The people of Millbrook would not understand. Hell, he barely understood it himself. But when he finally drifted to sleep, he dreamed not of raids and violence, but of his father's voice saying what he always said when Owen questioned his choices. The measure of a man is not in what is easy, but in what is right. Owen just hoped he had judged rightly. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of spring day that made farmers smile and plan. Owen was up before the sun, as always, and when he emerged from the house, he found Grishka already awake, sitting on an overturned bucket outside the barn door. She stood when she saw him, moving stiffly but with more strength than yesterday. "How is the wound?" he asked. "Better," she said. "Thank you for the food and the shelter." Owen nodded, feeling suddenly awkward. He had played this moment over in his mind a dozen times during the night, but now that it was here, he did not know quite how to begin. "Have you worked a farm before?" "No," Grishka admitted. "In the mountains we keep goats and grow some barley, but nothing like this." She gestured at the field stretching out behind the barn, still brown from winter but showing the first hints of green. "Then I will teach you." Owen led her to the barn, where his 2 oxen, Steady and True, were already stirring in their stalls. "This is Steady and this is True. They are brothers, 9 years old, strong as the mountains and twice as stubborn. We will be using them to plow the south field today." Over the next hour, Owen showed Grishka how to harness the oxen, how to check their hooves and teeth, how to speak to them in the low, calm voice that kept them cooperative. She learned quickly, her hands deft despite their size, and Owen found himself impressed by her focus. When the oxen were ready, he led them out to the field, Grishka following behind with the heavy wooden plow balanced on her shoulder as if it weighed nothing. "The key is keeping the furrow straight," Owen explained, taking the plow handles. "You want to cut deep enough to turn the soil, but not so deep that you exhaust the animals. Watch the angle here, see?" He demonstrated the first furrow, the plow biting into the earth and turning it over in a rich, dark wave. The oxen plodded forward, patient and steady, while Owen guided the plow behind them. When he reached the end of the furrow, he turned back to find Grishka watching him with intense concentration. "You try," he said, offering her the handles. She took them carefully, positioning herself the way he had shown her. Owen walked alongside her as she started the oxen forward, ready to intervene if needed, but Grishka's strength and coordination were remarkable. The furrow was not quite as straight as his, but for a first attempt, it was impressive. They worked through the morning, taking turns with the plow, stopping periodically to rest the oxen and drink from the water jug Owen had brought. The sun climbed higher, warming the spring air, and Grishka stripped off her leather armor, working in just her linen shirt and breeches. Owen tried not to stare at the play of muscle beneath green skin, the way she moved with a warrior's grace even in this peaceful labor. "Why do you farm alone?" Grishka asked during one of their breaks, sitting on the ground with her back against a fence post. "A man with land like this usually has a wife, children." Owen took a long drink of water, considering his answer. "I was engaged once," he said finally. "Her name was Emma. We grew up together, planned to marry after I came back from my militia service. But while I was gone, she met someone else, a merchant's son from the next county over. Someone who could give her a life that did not involve dirt under her fingernails and livestock in the yard." He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "I cannot blame her. This is a hard life." "She was a fool," Grishka said bluntly. "A man who can make things grow from the earth is worth 10 merchants." Owen felt something warm unfurl in his chest at her words, unexpected and oddly comforting. "Thank you. What about you? Did you leave anyone behind in the mountains?" Grishka shook her head. "Orcs do not marry young. We fight first, prove ourselves. I had offers, but I never accepted any of them. I wanted to be the greatest warrior of my generation." Her laugh was bitter. "And I was, until I realized what that meant." They returned to work, and by the time the sun began its descent toward the western hills, they had plowed nearly half the south field. Owen's shoulders ached with good, honest exhaustion, and Grishka, despite her injury, had kept pace with him all day. As they led the oxen back to the barn, Owen found himself feeling something he had not felt in a long time: companionship. "You did well today," he said as they unharnessed the oxen. "Better than I expected." "I told you I could work," Grishka replied, but there was a hint of pride in her voice that made Owen smile. "That you did. Come up to the house when you are done here. I will make supper." Dinner that night was simple: stew made from last autumn's vegetables and salt pork, with fresh bread and butter. They ate at the small table, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. Owen found himself stealing glances at Grishka, noticing details he had missed before. The way her tusks curved just slightly upward, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the small scar that bisected her left eyebrow. "Tell me about your father," Grishka said suddenly. "The one who left you this farm." Owen set down his spoon, surprised by the question. "He was a good man. Strong, patient, and stubborn as those oxen out there. He taught me everything I know about farming, about living. When he got sick, he made me promise I would keep this place going no matter what. And you have kept that promise." "I have tried." Owen tore off a piece of bread. "Some years are harder than others. 2 years ago, the drought nearly ruined me. Last year, raiders took half my livestock." He paused, realizing what he had just said. "Orc raiders." Grishka met his eyes steadily. "Perhaps it was my clan. Perhaps I was even there. I do not remember every raid." The honest acknowledgment sat between them like a stone. Owen could have been angry, could have held it against her, but what would be the point? The past was the past, and the woman sitting across from him now was trying to build something different. "You are not that person anymore," he said quietly. "I hope not," Grishka replied. "I am trying not to be." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely satisfying. They rose with the sun and worked until dusk, plowing and planting, mending fences and clearing ditches, tending to the handful of chickens and the small kitchen garden behind the house. Grishka proved to be an invaluable worker, her strength and endurance far exceeding Owen's. Tasks that would have taken him days alone, they completed in half the time together. But it was not just the labor that changed things. In the evenings, over simple meals, they talked. Grishka told him about life in the Iron Peak Mountains, about the harsh beauty of her homeland and the even harsher code of her people. She spoke of her mother, who had died in childbirth when Grishka was young, and her father, a war chief who had never forgiven her for being born female instead of male. She described the training that had turned her into a weapon, the raids that had defined her youth, and the slow erosion of her spirit that had led to that final, fatal moment with the boy and his pitchfork. In turn, Owen shared stories of his own childhood, of growing up on the farm, of learning to read from his mother before she passed when he was 10, of the weight of being an only child with no siblings to share the burden. He told her about his time in the militia, the friends he had made and lost, the realization that he was not cut out for a soldier's life. He spoke of his loneliness, of the way the years had stretched out before him like an empty road with no destination. "You could remarry," Grishka pointed out one evening, 3 weeks into her stay. The south field was now fully planted with wheat, and they had started on the east field for corn. "Find a wife from Millbrook or one of the other towns." Owen shrugged, uncomfortable with the topic. "The women in Millbrook see me as a failure. My farm is too small, my prospects too poor, and the ones who might overlook that I do not love." "Love," Grishka repeated as if the word were foreign. "Orcs do not marry for love. We marry for strength, for alliance. Love is considered a weakness." "That sounds lonely," Owen said. Grishka looked at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "It was," she admitted quietly. That night, lying in his loft, Owen found himself thinking about her words, about the life she had described, and he felt a fierce protectiveness rise in his chest. She deserved better than what she had been given. They both did, but the fragile peace they had built was not to last. In the 4th week of Grishka's stay, Owen rode into Millbrook to buy seed and supplies. The town was small, just a cluster of buildings around a central square, but it served the farming families of the area. Owen tied his horse outside the general store and went inside, where Martin Fletcher, the owner, greeted him with a friendly nod. "Owen, good to see you. How is the planting going?" "Well, thank you." Owen handed over his list. "I need these supplies when you have a chance." Martin began gathering items, chatting about weather and crops and the usual topics of rural life. But then his wife, Alice, came in from the back room, her face tight with disapproval. "Owen Yarrow," she said, her voice sharp. "Is it true you have an orc living on your property?" The store went quiet. Owen felt every eye turn toward him, and he knew in that moment that his carefully maintained secret was out. "I have a worker helping with the spring planting," he said carefully. "A worker," Alice repeated. "Thomas Green saw her 3 days ago when he was passing by your land. A green-skinned orc woman, plain as day. Have you lost your mind?" "She is just helping with the farm," Owen said, trying to keep his voice level. "She is no threat to anyone." "No threat." Martin set down the sack of seed he had been holding. "Owen, those creatures killed my cousin in the war. They burned out half the Johnsons' farm just 2 years ago. And you are harboring one." "The war is over," Owen said. "The treaty was signed. She has laid down her weapons and wants only to work." "They are savages," Alice spat. "You cannot trust them. She will slit your throat in your sleep and steal everything you own." "She has had plenty of opportunity for that," Owen pointed out, feeling his temper rise. "And she has done nothing but work hard and keep to herself." "Then you are an even bigger fool than we thought," Martin said. "I am sorry, Owen, but I cannot serve someone who keeps company with orcs. You will have to find your supplies elsewhere." Owen stared at him, disbelief warring with anger. "Martin, we have done business for years. My father bought from your father. And I respected your father, but this is too much." Martin crossed his arms. "When you come to your senses and send that creature away, you will be welcome back. Until then, I have nothing for you." Owen left the store empty-handed, aware of the whispers that followed him out. He rode home in a black mood, dreading what he would have to tell Grishka. She deserved to know that their arrangement had consequences, that the fragile peace they had built was already crumbling under the weight of prejudice and fear. When he arrived back at the farm, he found Grishka in the barn, repairing a broken stall door with competent efficiency. She looked up as he entered, and her expression immediately shifted to concern. "What happened?" Owen told her, the words bitter in his mouth. When he finished, Grishka was silent, her face unreadable. "I will leave," she said finally. "I have brought you trouble as I knew I would. You have been kinder to me than I deserved, but I will not cost you your livelihood." "No," Owen said, surprised by the vehemence in his own voice. "You will not leave." "Owen, no," he repeated. "I made you a promise, room and board through the harvest in exchange for work. You have held up your end, and I will hold up mine. If the people of Millbrook want to be small-minded and hateful, that is their problem, not ours. But the supplies, there are other towns," Owen said. "Redfield is a day's ride, and they do not know me or care about my business. We will manage." Grishka looked at him with something like awe. "You would do this? For me?" "For you," Owen confirmed. "And for myself, because I will be damned if I let Martin Fletcher tell me how to run my own farm." Something passed between them in that moment, something unspoken but profound. Grishka stepped forward, and for a moment Owen thought she might embrace him, but instead she held out her hand. He took it, feeling the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip, and they shook, a pact made and sealed. But that night, as Owen lay in his loft, he could not shake the feeling that they had just crossed a threshold from which there was no return. The true test came a week later. Owen had ridden to Redfield for supplies, leaving Grishka to tend the farm. He had been gone most of the day, and when he returned in the late afternoon, he found her standing in the yard, a pitchfork held loosely in one hand, facing down 3 men on horseback. Owen recognized them immediately. Thomas Green, who had apparently spread the word about Grishka, and 2 of his friends, all of them young and full of righteous anger. They had the look of men who had worked themselves up to violence. "There is the orc lover himself," Thomas called as Owen dismounted. "We were just explaining to your pet monster that she is not welcome here." "She is not a pet, and this is my land," Owen said, moving to stand beside Grishka. "You need to leave. We need to leave." One of Thomas's friends laughed. "You are the one harboring a raider. Do you know what those things did to us, to our families?" "I know exactly what happened in the war," Owen said coldly. "I was there, which is more than I can say for any of you." All 3 men had been too young to serve in the militia. "And I know that the war is over and people have a right to change." "Orcs do not change," Thomas said. He spat on the ground near Grishka's feet. "They are animals, and you are a traitor for sheltering one." Grishka had not moved, had not spoken, but Owen could feel the tension radiating from her. Her knuckles were white on the pitchfork handle, and he knew that if she chose, she could take all 3 men down before they knew what hit them. But she was holding herself in check, waiting. "I am going to say this once," Owen said, his voice dropping into a register he had not used since his militia days. "Get off my land, now." "Or what?" Thomas sneered. "You will sick your monster on us." "No," Grishka said quietly, speaking for the first time. "He will not." Because I am not a monster, and I will not give you the satisfaction of proving you right." She lowered the pitchfork, setting it down carefully, and straightened to her full height. "I am sorry for what my people did to yours. I cannot take back the past, but I am trying to be better. If you cannot see that, then you are the one who is blind." For a moment, Owen thought it might work. There was something in her bearing, in her dignity, that gave even Thomas pause. But then one of the friends, emboldened by drink or stupidity, urged his horse forward and swung a club he had been holding down toward Grishka's head. Owen moved without thinking, shoving Grishka aside and taking the blow himself. Pain exploded across his shoulder and he went down hard, the world tilting sideways. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Grishka roar, a sound of pure fury, and then she was moving. The man who had struck Owen did not stand a chance. Grishka yanked him from his horse with one hand and slammed him into the ground, pinning him there with a knee on his chest. The other two tried to intervene, but she moved like lightning, disarming one with a strike to his wrist and unseating the other with a sweep of her leg. In less than 30 seconds, all three men were on the ground, groaning, and Grishka stood over them like an avenging goddess. "You could have hurt him," she snarled, and Owen realized with a start that she was crying, tears streaming down her face. "He showed me kindness, and you could have hurt him." "Grishka," Owen managed, pushing himself up with his good arm. "Grishka, stop." She turned to him, and the anguish in her eyes broke his heart. "They hurt you." "I am fine," he lied, though his shoulder was screaming. "Let them go." For a moment he thought she might refuse. But then she stepped back, releasing the men, who scrambled to their horses and fled without a backward glance. When they were gone, Grishka dropped to her knees beside Owen, her hands hovering over him as if afraid to touch. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "This is my fault. I brought this on you." "No," Owen said firmly, reaching up with his good hand to cup her cheek. The gesture surprised them both, the intimacy of it sudden and undeniable. "They brought it on themselves. You did nothing wrong." "I could have killed them," she said. "I wanted to kill them." "But you did not," Owen pointed out. "That is what matters." They sat there in the dirt together, the sun setting behind them, and Owen realized with a clarity that stole his breath that he was in love with her. Not because she had defended him, though that was part of it, but because of everything she represented. Strength and vulnerability, violence and restraint, a broken past and the hope of a better future. He loved her, this orc woman who had laid her weapons at his gate and asked for nothing more than a chance to work. And from the look in her eyes, the way her hand came up to cover his where it still rested against her cheek, she felt the same. But the moment was broken by a wave of dizziness that washed over Owen, and Grishka's expression shifted to alarm. "You are hurt worse than you said. Come, let me get you inside." She helped him to the house, her strength effortless, and settled him onto his bed in the loft. The climb up the stairs had been agony, but Owen gritted his teeth and bore it. Grishka examined his shoulder with gentle hands, her touch surprisingly tender for a warrior. "I do not think anything is broken," she said finally, "but you will have a magnificent bruise and it will hurt for days." "Worth it," Owen said, trying to smile. "Do not be stupid," she chided, but her voice was thick with emotion. "You should not have taken that blow for me." "Of course I should have," Owen said. "Grishka, you cannot still think I would just stand by and let them hurt you." "Why?" she demanded, her voice rising. "Why do you care so much? I am nothing to you, just a worker you took pity on." "You are not nothing," Owen said, catching her hand. "You are everything. Do you not see that?" Grishka froze, staring at him. "Owen." "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I know it is insane. I know we barely know each other, and you are an orc and I am human, and the whole world will tell us we are wrong. But I do not care. I love you, Grishka." I think I have loved you since the moment you laid down your weapons and asked me for a chance." For a long, terrible moment, she said nothing, and Owen's heart sank. He had ruined everything, moved too fast, assumed too much. But then Grishka leaned down and pressed her forehead to his, a gesture he knew from his militia days was one of deep affection among orcs. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I could love anyone, not after everything I have done, but you showed me kindness when I deserved none. You saw me as a person when everyone else saw a monster. How could I not love you?" Owen reached up with his good arm and pulled her down, kissing her with all the pent-up longing and fear and hope that had been building inside him for weeks. She kissed him back, her tusks pressing gently against his lips, her hands cradling his face as if he were something precious. It was awkward and perfect and absolutely right. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grishka laughed, a sound Owen had never heard from her before, bright and unguarded. "We are both fools," she said. "Probably," Owen agreed. "But I would rather be a fool with you than wise and alone." She stayed with him that night, curled up beside him on the narrow bed, her warmth chasing away the pain in his shoulder. They did not make love. Owen was too injured, and they both knew that some things required more time and care, but they held each other, and that was enough. In the morning, reality reasserted itself. Owen's shoulder was stiff and aching, and the memory of the confrontation with Thomas and his friends hung over them like a storm cloud. As they sat at the breakfast table, picking at their food, Owen knew they needed to talk about what came next. "They will come back," Grishka said quietly, voicing the fear they both shared. "And next time they will bring more men. I cannot let you be hurt again because of me." "So what do you suggest?" Owen asked. "That you leave, because I will not let that happen." "Then what?" Grishka set down her spoon. "We cannot fight the whole town, Owen, and you need them. You need their trade, their cooperation. I am costing you everything." "You are giving me everything," Owen countered. "Before you came, I was just existing, going through the motions. Now I have a reason to wake up in the morning, a reason to care. If the town cannot accept that, then maybe I do not belong here." "You are talking about leaving your home," Grishka said. "The farm your father gave you, you cannot do that for me." "I can do whatever I choose," Owen said stubbornly. "But it will not come to that. There has to be another way." The answer came from an unexpected source. 2 days later, as Owen was working in the barn with Grishka, his shoulder still bound but healing, a rider approached the farm. Owen tensed, expecting more trouble, but relaxed when he recognized Samuel Oakley, an older farmer who lived on the far edge of the county. Samuel was known for his fairness and common sense, and he had always been kind to Owen. "Owen, Grishka," Samuel said, dismounting. He nodded to both of them equally, which was itself a small miracle. "I heard about what happened with Thomas Green and his boys. I wanted to come see if you were all right." "We are managing," Owen said cautiously. "Thank you for your concern." Samuel studied them both for a long moment, then sighed. "I am going to be blunt. The town is divided. Half the people think you are a fool and a traitor for keeping an orc on your land. The other half think Thomas and his friends are head-headed idiots who had no right to assault you on your own property." "And which half are you in?" Grishka asked. Samuel smiled. "I am in the half that thinks a person should be judged by their actions, not their race. My wife and I, we have been watching what is happening here. We see an orc woman who has laid down her weapons and asked for honest work. We see a young man who honored that request, even knowing it would cost him. And we see 2 people trying to build something good in a world that wants to tear them apart." Owen felt something loosen in his chest, a tightness he had not realized was there. "Thank you," he said hoarsely. "Do not thank me yet," Samuel said. I am here to make you an offer, but it is going to require courage from both of you. In 2 weeks, the county is having its spring festival. All the farms come together to celebrate the planting season, trade goods, and socialize. I want you both to attend. You want us to walk into a crowd of people who hate us, Grishka said incredulously. I want you to face them, Samuel corrected. Show them that you are not monsters or traitors, just two people trying to live their lives. You cannot change minds by hiding. You have to stand up and be seen. Owen looked at Grishka, saw the fear in her eyes, and knew his own face mirrored it. But he also saw something else, determination. She had fled once from her clan, and it had cost her everything. She would not flee again. We will be there, Owen said. The 2 weeks, until the festival, passed in a blur of work and worry. They finished planting the corn and started on the kitchen garden, preparing it for the summer vegetables that would sustain them through the winter. They worked side by side, their new understanding of each other deepening with each passing day. Owen's shoulder healed, and the bruise faded to yellow and green, a reminder of the violence that had brought their feelings into the open. At night, they talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories, their hopes and fears. Grishka told him about the few happy memories she had from her childhood. Her mother's lullabies, the taste of wild blackberries, the first time she had climbed to the top of Iron Peak and seen the world spread out below her. Owen shared his own treasured moments. His father teaching him to fish, his mother's laugh, the satisfaction of watching seeds he had planted break through the soil. They kissed, often and with growing passion, but always stopped before things went too far. It was not propriety that held them back, but a mutual understanding that when they finally came together, it would be as a true commitment, not just desire. They were building something that mattered, and it deserved to be done right. The night before the festival, Owen could not sleep. He lay in the loft, staring at the rafters, while Grishka slept in the barn below. Tomorrow they would walk into the lion's den, and he had no idea if Samuel's faith in humanity would prove justified or disastrously misplaced. But as he lay there, he thought about his father, about the man who had taught him that doing the right thing was often the hardest thing, and he found a measure of peace. The spring festival was held in a large meadow between 3 of the largest farms in the county. By the time Owen and Grishka arrived in the wagon, the celebration was already in full swing. There were tables laden with food, barrels of cider and beer, a space cleared for dancing, and clusters of people everywhere, laughing and talking. The noise was almost overwhelming after weeks of relative isolation on the farm. As they climbed down from the wagon, the noise began to fade. People noticed them, noticed Grishka's green skin and tusks, and the conversations died like candles being snuffed out. Within moments, the entire festival had gone silent, every eye turned toward them. Owen felt Grishka tense beside him, and he reached out, taking her hand in his. "Together," he murmured. "Together," she agreed. They walked into the meadow, and the crowd parted before them like water. Owen kept his head high, his grip on Grishka's hand firm, and he met every stare with calm defiance. They made their way to one of the tables and stood there, waiting. For a long, agonizing moment, nothing happened. Then Samuel Oakley stepped forward, his wife Martha at his side. "Owen, Grishka, I am glad you could make it. Martha made her famous apple tart, and I know she would love to share it with you." Martha smiled warmly and cut 2 generous slices, handing them over. "Welcome," she said simply. It was as if a dam had broken. Other people began to move, to talk, the festival slowly coming back to life. Not everyone was friendly. Owen saw Thomas Green and his friends glowering from the far side of the meadow, but enough people were willing to be civil that the tension began to ease. An older woman named Helen approached them tentatively. "You are the orc who is working Owen's farm?" she asked Grishka. "I am," Grishka replied, her voice steady despite her obvious discomfort. Helen studied her for a moment, then nodded. "My son was killed in the war by an orc raiding party 5 years ago." Owen felt Grishka stiffen, but Helen continued. "I hated your kind for a long time. I still do, truth be told. But Samuel told me you laid down your weapons and asked for honest work. That takes courage." She held out her hand. "I will not say I forgive you for what your people did, but I will say that I respect what you are trying to do now." Grishka looked at the offered hand as if it were a lifeline, then took it carefully. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am sorry for your son. I cannot change the past, but I swear I will never raise a weapon against your people again." Helen nodded and moved away, and Owen let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. It was not acceptance, not exactly, but it was a start. The festival continued, and slowly, hesitantly, people began to approach them. Some were hostile, others merely curious, but a surprising number were willing to give them a chance. Owen watched Grishka navigate the conversations with a grace he had not expected, answering questions honestly, acknowledging the harm her people had done while also asserting her desire to change. At one point, a group of children approached, staring at Grishka with wide eyes. One little girl, perhaps 6 years old, tugged on her mother's skirt and whispered loudly, "Mama, is she a real orc?" "I am," Grishka said, crouching down to the girl's level. "My name is Grishka. What is yours?" "Lily," the girl said shyly. "That is a beautiful name," Grishka said. "Would you like to know a secret, Lily?" The girl nodded eagerly. "Orcs are not so different from humans," Grishka said. "We laugh and cry and love just like you do. The only real difference is that I am green and you are pink." Lily giggled at that, and her mother smiled despite herself. "Come along, Lily," she said gently, leading her daughter away. But as she left, she glanced back at Grishka and mouthed, "Thank you." By the time the sun began to set, Owen felt like they had scaled a mountain. It was not perfect. There were still plenty of people who refused to speak to them, who watched them with open hostility, but it was progress. As they prepared to leave, Samuel found them again. "You did well today," he said. "Both of you, you gave people something to think about." "Do you think it will make a difference?" Owen asked. "Time will tell," Samuel said. "But I have faith. Change does not happen overnight, but it does happen if good people are willing to stand up for it." On the ride home, Grishka was quiet, staring out at the darkening fields. Owen let her be, knowing she needed time to process everything that had happened. But when they reached the farm and he helped her down from the wagon, she turned to him with tears in her eyes. "I did not think it was possible," she said. "I thought everyone would hate me forever. But today some of them saw me, not as a monster but as a person." "Because you are a person," Owen said, pulling her into his arms. "A beautiful, brave, incredible person, and I love you." "I love you too," she said. And then she was kissing him, deep and hungry and full of all the emotion they had been holding back. Owen kissed her back with equal fervor, his hands sliding into her hair, feeling the warmth of her skin against his. When they finally broke apart, breathless and wanting, Grishka said, "Take me inside. Please, Owen, I want to be with you." Owen did not need to be asked twice. He led her into the house, up the narrow stairs to his loft, and there, in the soft glow of the lamp, they came together at last. It was awkward and tender and absolutely perfect. Two souls finding solace in each other. Two bodies learning a new language of love and trust. Grishka was gentle despite her strength, and Owen was patient despite his desire, and together they built something that was entirely theirs. Afterward they lay tangled together, Grishka's head on Owen's chest, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her back. I want to stay here forever, she murmured. With you on this farm, is that possible? It is possible, Owen said. If you want it, we will make it happen. I want it, she said fiercely. I want to build a life with you, Owen. I want to plant seeds and watch them grow. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep in your arms every night. I want a future. Then that is what we will have, Owen promised. Together. The summer passed in a golden haze of hard work and quiet happiness. The crops grew tall and strong, the livestock flourished, and Owen and Grishka settled into a partnership that felt as natural as breathing. They worked side by side during the day and fell into each other's arms at night, building a life that was entirely their own. The people of Millbrook slowly, grudgingly, began to accept their relationship. Martin Fletcher never did unbend enough to sell to Owen again, but enough other merchants were willing to trade that it did not matter. Thomas Green and his friends kept their distance after the festival, and while there were still those who muttered about orcs and traitors, the worst of the hostility had faded. Samuel and Martha Oakley became close friends, stopping by regularly to share meals and conversation. Other neighbors began to follow suit, drawn by curiosity or kindness, and Grishka gradually learned that not all humans were enemies. She began to relax, to laugh more freely, to let down her guard in ways Owen had never imagined possible. In late summer, as the wheat ripened to gold and the corn stood tall in the fields, Owen made a decision. He asked Samuel for help, and together they crafted a ring from a piece of silver Owen's mother had left him, simple but beautiful. And then, one evening as the sun set over the farm, Owen led Grishka to the gate where she had first laid down her weapons months ago. "This is where it all started," he said, taking her hands, "where you asked me for a chance and I said yes. Grishka, you have given me more than I ever thought I would have. You have given me purpose and love and a future I actually want to live. I know we come from different worlds and I know the path ahead will not always be easy, but I do not care. I want to walk it with you." He knelt, pulling out the ring, and Grishka's eyes went wide. "Will you marry me, Grishka? Will you be my wife?" For a moment she just stared at him and Owen's heart hammered in his chest. Then she laughed, that bright, unguarded sound he had come to treasure, and pulled him to his feet. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you. I will be your wife and you will be my husband, and we will build a life that no one can take from us." He slipped the ring onto her finger and they kissed there by the gate, the place where everything had changed, and Owen felt a peace settle over him that he had never known before. This was right. This was home. The wedding took place in early autumn after the harvest had been brought in. Samuel and Martha hosted it at their farm, and to Owen's surprise and delight, nearly half the county showed up. There were still some who stayed away, who refused to acknowledge the union, but enough came that the celebration felt real and joyous. Helen, the woman who had lost her son, brought a quilt she had made herself as a gift. "For your new life together," she said gruffly, pressing it into Grishka's hands. "May it keep you warm." Grishka clutched the quilt to her chest, overcome, and Helen smiled. "You have proven me right, girl. You are not your people's sins. You are your own person, and you have chosen well." The ceremony itself was simple, conducted by Samuel in lieu of a priest, since no church would have married them. Owen and Grishka stood before their friends and neighbors and pledged themselves to each other, their voices steady despite the emotion that threatened to overwhelm them both. "I vow to stand by you," Owen said, "in times of plenty and times of hardship, in joy and in sorrow, for as long as we both live." "I vow to love you," Grishka replied, "to honor you, to protect you, and to build a life with you that is worthy of the faith you placed in me." "You saved me, Owen Yarrow, and I will spend the rest of my life being grateful for that." You saved me too, Owen said, his voice breaking. You gave me a reason to hope again. They kissed, and the gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause. It was not perfect. Owen saw the faces of those who still disapproved, still condemned, but it was enough. More than enough. The feast that followed was a raucous affair, with food and drink and dancing that lasted well into the night. Owen and Grishka were pulled into the circle of dancers, laughing as they stumbled through steps neither of them knew, surrounded by people who had chosen to celebrate their union despite the prejudices of the world. As the night drew to a close and they prepared to return to their farm, Martha pulled Grishka aside. "You are family now," she said simply. "If you ever need anything, you come to us. Understand?" Grishka nodded, too moved to speak, and embraced the older woman. It was the first time Owen had seen her initiate physical affection with anyone but him, and the sight filled him with joy. They rode home under a sky full of stars, the wagon creaking beneath them, and when they reached the farm, Owen carried Grishka over the threshold despite her laughing protests. They made love that night with a new intensity. No longer just two people seeking comfort, but husband and wife, bound together by vows and love and the promise of a shared future. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were bad harvests and difficult winters, times when money was tight and the future uncertain. There were people who never accepted their marriage, who whispered behind their backs and refused to do business with them. And there were moments when Grishka's past came back to haunt her, nightmares of the people she had killed, fears that she would never be able to fully atone. But through it all, they had each other. They built their farm into something thriving and beautiful, expanding the fields and adding more livestock. They became pillars of the small community that had slowly grown around them, helping neighbors in need and opening their home to anyone who needed shelter. 5 years after they married, Grishka gave birth to their first child, a daughter with Owen's brown eyes and Grishka's green skin. They named her Anya, and she was perfect. 2 years later, a son followed, and then another daughter, each child a blend of their two worlds, a living testament to the fact that love could bridge any divide. The children of Millbrook grew up playing with Owen and Grishka's children, and slowly, the old prejudices began to fade. A new generation was rising, one that saw orcs and humans not as enemies, but as neighbors, as friends, as family. It was not a perfect world. Owen knew it never would be, but it was better. So much better than what had come before. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Owen and Grishka stood together at the farm gate, the same place where she had laid down her weapons all those years ago. Their children were playing in the yard behind them, their laughter ringing out across the fields, and Owen felt a contentment so profound it almost hurt. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Leaving your clan, coming here, choosing this life?" Grishka turned to him, her dark eyes soft with love. "Never," she said. "This is the life I was meant for, Owen. You are the person I was meant to find. Everything I went through, all the pain and violence and loss, it led me here. To you, to our children, to this." She gestured at the farm, at the fields golden with wheat, at the life they had built together. "I would not change a single moment." Owen pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Neither would I," he said. "You asked me to let you work all those years ago. But what you really did was teach me how to live again, how to love, how to hope." "We taught each other," Grishka corrected. "That is what love is, I think. Two people teaching each other how to be better." They stood there together as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold, their children's laughter a symphony in the background, and Owen knew that this was happiness. Not the absence of struggle or pain, but the presence of love and purpose and belonging. The farm would continue to thrive, their family would grow, and the world would keep turning. There would be more challenges ahead, more prejudices to overcome, more battles to fight not with swords and arrows but with patience and kindness, and the stubborn refusal to give up on each other. But Owen Yarrow and his wife Grishka had faced worse and prevailed. They had taken two broken lives and forged them into something whole and beautiful. They had proven that love could conquer hate, that redemption was possible, that the past did not have to define the future. And as the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Owen looked at the woman beside him, the orc warrior who had laid down her weapons and asked for a chance to work. And he knew that saying yes to her that day was the best decision he had ever made. Together they walked back to the house, hand in hand, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. Because they had each other and they had their children, and they had a love that had been tested and proven true. The farm gate stood behind them, empty now of weapons, but full of memory. It was the place where everything had changed, where a desperate woman had taken a leap of faith, and a lonely man had chosen compassion over fear. It was the place where their story had begun, and what a story it had been. What a story it continued to be, written in sweat and soil and love, in the laughter of children and the quiet moments of connection, in every sunrise that dawned over their fields and every sunset that painted their world in gold. Grishka had been done fighting when she arrived at that gate 10 years ago. She had laid down her weapons and asked for work, for a chance, for a new beginning. And Owen had given her all of that and more. He had given her a home, a family, a future. But in truth, they had given those things to each other. That was the real magic of what they had built together, not that one had saved the other, but that they had saved each other, again and again, every single day. As they reached the porch, their eldest daughter Anya came running up, her green skin flushed from playing. "Mama, Papa, can we have a story before bed?" "Of course," Grishka said, scooping her up. "What story would you like?" "Tell us how you and Papa met," Anya said, as she always did. It was her favorite story, and Owen suspected it always would be. Grishka looked at Owen, and he saw the love and gratitude and joy in her eyes, and he smiled. "All right," she said, carrying Anya inside as their other children followed. "But you have heard this one 100 times." "I want to hear it 100 more," Anya insisted. And so, as the family gathered in the warm glow of the hearth, Grishka began the story. Once upon a time, there was a warrior who was tired of fighting. Owen listened to his wife's voice, watched his children's rapt faces, and felt a peace settle over him that went bone deep. This was his legacy, not just the farm he would pass on to his children, but the love and acceptance and hope he and Grishka had fought so hard to build. The world outside might still harbor prejudice and fear. There might still be those who looked at their family and saw only difference, only wrongness. But here, within these walls, there was only love, only belonging, only the unshakable certainty that they had found where they were meant to be. Years later, when Owen and Grishka were old and gray, their children grown with families of their own, they would still tell that story. How an orc woman had laid all her weapons at a farm gate and said she was done fighting, asking only for the chance to work. How a lonely farmer had taken a chance on her. How they had fallen in love despite a world that told them they should not. How they had built a life together that became a beacon for others seeking the same courage. The farm would pass to Anya eventually, and she would tend it with the same love and care her parents had shown. She would teach her own children the value of compassion over fear, of judging people by their actions rather than their heritage. And the story of Owen and Grishka would become legend in those parts, a tale of hope and redemption that people would tell for generations. But on that night, their 10th anniversary, as Grishka finished the story and tucked their children into bed, as she and Owen climbed the stairs to their loft and fell into each other's arms. All of that was still ahead. All they knew was that they had each other, and that was enough. "I love you," Owen whispered in the darkness. "I love you too," Grishka replied. "Thank you for giving me a chance all those years ago." "Thank you for being brave enough to ask for one," Owen said. "You changed my life, Grishka. You made it worth living." "We did that for each other," she said, echoing her words from earlier. "That is what makes it real." They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had every night for 10 years, and the farm stood quiet and peaceful around them. The fields waited for spring planting, the animals slept in their pens, and the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Somewhere in the mountains, perhaps other orcs were laying down their weapons, seeking a different path. Somewhere in human towns, perhaps other people were learning to see past prejudice and fear. The world was changing, slowly but surely, and Owen and Grishka had been part of that change. But more than that, they had found each other. Two broken souls who had healed together, two lonely hearts that had learned to love, two lives that had intertwined to create something beautiful and lasting. The orc woman had laid all her weapons at the farm gate. She had said she was done fighting, had asked to be allowed to work. And in doing so, she had found not just employment but a home, not just acceptance but love, not just survival but a life worth living. And the farmer who had taken her in, he had found the same. Together, they had built a future neither could have imagined, a family that defied the prejudices of the world, a love that proved stronger than hate. As dawn broke over the farm the next morning, painting the fields in shades of rose and gold, Owen woke to find Grishka already stirring beside him. They rose together as they always did, and began the daily routine that had become as natural as breathing. There was work to do, crops to tend, children to raise, a life to live. But first they paused at the window, looking out over the land they had cultivated together, and Owen wrapped his arms around his wife, feeling her lean back against him with a sigh of contentment. "Ready for another day?" he asked. "With you," Grishka replied. "Always." And so they descended the stairs together, ready to face whatever the day would bring, knowing that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. The farm awaited them, their children would soon wake, and life would continue its beautiful, messy, perfect unfolding. The weapons stayed buried in the barn, relics of a past Grishka had left behind. She had no need of them anymore. She had found a different kind of strength in gentleness, a different kind of power in love. And Owen had found his purpose not in solitary endurance, but in partnership. Together, they walked out into the morning light, hand in hand, ready to work, to love, to live. The orc woman who had laid down her weapons had found her place at last. The farmer who had opened his gate to her had found his heart made whole. And the farm where it all began stood as testament to the truth that love, real love, could overcome anything. Their story was not one of grand battles or epic quests. It was quieter than that, more intimate. It was a story of daily choices, of small kindnesses, of two people deciding every single day to choose each other. And in the end, that was the most powerful kind of story there was. The sun rose higher, warming the earth, calling them to work. And Owen and Grishka answered that call together, as they always would, for all the years that remained to them. The orc woman had been done fighting when she arrived. Now, she had found something worth living for instead, and that made all the difference.